Maximum subarray. Given an integer array nums, find the contiguous subarray containing at least one number, which has the largest sum, and return its sum. So for this first example, they give us this array, and they are looking for the maximum output, which they say this is the subarray that gives us the largest sum of 6, where we can find that right here, 4, -1, 2, and 1. So how do we actually find this subarray within this entire array? So you may be thinking the easiest way is to just check for every possibility, whereas check -2, and that's our current maximum. -2 plus 1 is -1. That's our current maximum. Next, so on until you get to the entire array. And then you can X that out, check this, check this, check this, and so on, right? And we can do this with a few for loops. But before we go down this path, we need to think to ourselves, what are the key things that we are looking for? One of the biggest hints that we're given is that we're looking simply for the maximum, right? And we don't care about anything other than just the maximum subarray and the output of that, right? So what can we do with this? So the way we need to look at this is from more of a linear path rather than looping. And the way we can do this is by checking each element and its neighbor, right? So there's a few principles. The way we got this answer, right, the 4, -1, 2, 1 from here, is something we need to notice. This is the answer, right? So the 4, -1, 2, and 1. The thing is about this answer is that the first value is a positive and the last value is a positive, right? Because let's say that we did that, we checked this answer, right? And we included the -3. That -3 is only bringing our value down, right? So if we hack it off, it's already up. This sum is already up 3 more than it was with this value, right? So the number one thing that we need to remember is it's going to start with a positive value, okay? Second thing is it's going to end with a positive value as well. Likewise, if we did the 4 and 1, if we included the -5, then we're already down 5, right? So that doesn't make sense. So positive number, front and back. Okay, so if we go back to looking at this a bit more linearly, we can start with a current maximum where before we start, our current maximum is 0, right? We haven't even started. So we can assume our current maximum is 0. And we're simply going to start and work on setting our first current maximum. So we're going to start at the first indice, -2. Is -2 greater than our current maximum? And the answer is no. So we're literally going to just not worry about it. I'm going to move to the next indice. Okay, now we have 1. Is that greater than our current maximum? It is. So now we have a new maximum of 1. Great. Now we're going to move to the next indice. Since we have our current maximum, we're going to include the 1 and check if the next value creates a new current maximum. So 1 plus -3 is -2. Now the question that we need to pose is, obviously this is not our new current maximum, but will this ever be within our answers array, right? That subarray, whatever the answer is, will it ever be at the beginning? And because you can imagine these two values being within the array, because if you have the left one, you have to have the right, if there's anything to the right. These two values are going to create a negative number. So you'll never want a negative number at the beginning of your array, right? And let me show you the example, because we know the answer. The answer is this 4, -1, 2, and 1. This right here, these two numbers, create a 3. That's a positive integer, right? Likewise, the back two create a positive integer. I know there's a negative number within it, but this negative number does not overpower the positive number. And that's why it's the most, that's why it's the beginning of the array, right? So let's clear this up a bit. So essentially what's happening here is this 1 and -3 will never be part of the array because it's providing a negative value, right? So our current maximum would be -2, but 1 is still larger. So we just literally, we don't have to worry about these because we already have our maximum. We just don't have to worry about it. We'll move on. So we move on to the others. And now we have 4. So we have 4, and that is our new current maximum. So we're going to update this to be 4. Okay, and we move on to the next. Now we have 4 and 1, which is 3. It's not our new maximum, but we're also not going to get rid of it because it's still a positive value, right? So great, that's 3. Now we have these 3 values, and that's going to make a 5, which is now our new current maximum. Great, let's set that. All right, and let's check the next one. We have this, oops, we have this, and now this value is 6, which is once again our new current maximum. We'll set that again. Goodness. And then once we add this next one, we have a -5, which, as we mentioned before, it can't end in a negative number, right? So this obviously won't be our last. So we'll just skip this since this cannot be our last integer of our array, but we'll check the last one. And because this is a -1, these two values added together is -1, our array will never end in a negative value. So we can hack that off, and we know that this is our answer. So this is more of a indirect way of solving this, but it is more of a linear way. Rather than creating for loops to check every single possibility, we have some principles that we've created, right? And we can determine the answer through those. So let's check out the code now and see what we're working with. First of all, we're going to have to set some variables. We're going to have our current maximum, current max, and honestly, you can set it to 0, but it will work out the same if you set it to whatever's in the first spot, right? And what this will do is prevent cases where you have a scenario where there's just a -1 and then they want the answer to be -1, right? So we're going to just set it to the first indice. So our current maximum is always going to be the first index value. And then what we're going to need as well is to check that current sum. Remember, we were moving through this and we're going to say, oh, -2, and then, oh, that's not it, but 1 plus -3, which is -2. That is our current sum. That is the values that we're checking, right? So we're going to need that as well. So current sum, and we're just going to set that to 0 to start with. Okay, so now we're going to start our loop because we're still going to need to be able to loop through all of the variables. Okay, and now that we have our loop set up, the first thing that we need to check is if our current sum is less than 0, then we need to set our current sum to 0. Now, the way that we can look at this Okay, so for the first scenario, -2 is our current maximum, obviously, because we started there. And this is our sum, right? So this is going to be -1. That value right there is considered our current sum. But in a sense where current sum is less than 0, meaning we don't want to start our array with this value, right? Because our array, remember, has to always start with a positive number. This can't start here. So we're going to nix these values as a current sum and just reset it to 0. Okay? So that's all we're going to do is if current sum is less than 0, then I just want our current sum to equal 0. I don't want to start with a negative number at the beginning of our subarray. Okay, great. So now what we can do is we can actually create our current sum now that we have a blanket statement to cover those that are less than 0. So our current sum, we're going to add current sum plus nums of x. And what this is doing is getting the current sum, right, and adding the next value. So simply in a scenario where we are at 4, we are simply adding the next value to our current sum, right? Okay. And now we need to set our max, our current max. And the way that we're going to do this is we're going to actually determine if our current max is bigger or if our current sum is bigger, right? Because in some scenarios, say our current maximum is -2, and then we get to here, and then this is 3. We want to say, hey, 3 is bigger than -2, so replace it, right? So now it's 3. So the way we're doing this is we're just going to use the math operator and math.max. We're going to pass in current sum and current max. And it doesn't matter what order you put it in. It will reset it to, and it doesn't matter what order you put it in, it will assign current max the maximum value. And that's it. All we got to return is our current max. And once it finishes looping through the entire array, we will have our current maximum. Let's go ahead and run this. And there you have it. I hope this helped.